13 heroes gave their lives. I was just at Dover Air Force Base for the dignified transfer.
I am the repository of all good, humane, compassionate feeling. That has been completely exploded over the course of the last 4 weeks. Last night, more than 24 hours after we found out that the American military had left, Joe Biden decided to give a speech. Joe Biden had basically been hiding in the basement because the fallout from this is bad. It's really bad. It turns out that when you leave hundreds of American citizens behind, and then when you leave probably thousands of American green card holders behind, and tens of thousands of SIV holders behind, and a myriad number of Afghan allies who worked with us, and millions of people who actually don't want to live under the predations of the Taliban, it turns out you don't look empathetic. It turns out you look like a piece of bleep. That's what it turns out you look like. And when you do so, in absolutely cowardly fashion, refusing to answer questions from the press, giving mush-mouthed statements every couple of days, lying overtly throughout the entire process, talking about how everybody will get out, talking about how we're going to stay long enough to get everybody out, talking about how every contingency here was planned. It turns out people don't like you. It turns out they think that your empathy is merely an act at that point. And they are right. And you can see this in Joe Biden's poll numbers, which have now sunk into the low 40s. And after being dead solid at 50% his entire presidency, he is now down to about 40, 41% in a lot of these polls. And falling fast. Because he is not competent, and he is not capable, and he is not the quote-unquote empathetic grandfather figure that so many people thought they were electing. That is the takeaway. So Joe Biden goes into hiding yesterday. He doesn't come out. He has his Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, give a full, ridiculous speech in which he looked like he was delivering a hostage video. And he's looking slightly off camera at his cue cards. You had the CENTCOM commander, Kenneth McKenzie, go out there and humiliate himself by saying a bunch of stuff like the Taliban are now our best friends and we handled this beautifully. And finally, Joe Biden emerges after delaying his speech, right? He was supposed to give his speech yesterday about 1:30 Eastern time, and then it was about 2:45 Eastern time he was supposed to speak, and then finally he came out after 3 o'clock, which is his normal way. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes over there, but they have not hit a time for him to, like, they're much better about hitting timelines in coordination with the Taliban than they are with actually keeping their schedule with regard to the press. Right? They routinely call a time when he's going to speak to the press, and then they just kind of blow right through it. So finally, he emerges. And he proceeds to give a 30-minute diatribe. And it really was a diatribe. He is angry. He is grumpy. He's pissed off that you've questioned his obviously wonderful strategy. He blames every single person but himself. He has done everything absolutely perfectly. This thin-skinned buffoon. Everything he has done here was part of the plan, except when it wasn't part of the plan. And if it wasn't part of the plan, that's everybody else's fault but his. Joe Biden has said repeatedly the buck stops with him. The American public are holding him to that right now. But he doesn't want to be held to that. He's lying. He wants the buck to stop with Trump. He wants the buck to stop with the Afghan military. He wants the buck to stop with his own military commanders. He is hiding behind everybody for the one decision that he made and only he made, which was pull out right now, damn the consequences. Right? Everybody else is to blame. Everybody. The people who are stuck in Afghanistan are to blame. They're the ones. They should have just gotten out earlier, obviously. The president of the United States is a pathetic spectacle at this point in time. And once again, the key to all of this is understanding that it has utterly undercut his image of himself and his image on the world stage. Not because everyone thought he was an expert. Not because everybody thought that he was fluent in foreign policy. That was a creation of the press. It was always a myth. Joe Biden was never fluent at anything. The man's terrible at everything. He hasn't made a good foreign policy decision his entire career. I mean, he's so bad on foreign policy, he opposed the bin Laden raid. Now, of course, he uses the bin Laden raid as an excuse to get out of Afghanistan, but he opposed it at the time. No one was if you had watched Joe Biden his entire career, no one was under the impression that this guy was any sort of Einstein. I mean, the guy wasn't even a 6th grade science student. Joe Biden has always been horrific in terms of policy. Okay, but the one thing that was said for him, and this was, again, his entire pitch against Donald Trump, his entire pitch. It was not, my policy is going to be better than Trump, because his policies were not going to be better than Trump. Polls showed Americans actually liked Trump's policies better than Biden's. His entire pitch throughout 2020 is, I am a nice person. I am an empathetic person. I am a person who cares. Donald Trump, the cruelty is the point, as Adam Silver famously said. The cruelty is the point with Trump. But I, Joe Biden, I am the repository of all good, humane, compassionate feeling. That has been completely exploded over the course of the last 4 weeks. He ain't getting that back. The impression that Joe Biden is somebody who cares deeply about America, about American citizens, that this is somebody who, you know how many times over the course of his campaign, he tweeted that he's going to build a society where we leave no one behind. And now he is physically leaving behind Americans with the worst people on earth, the Taliban. And actually, I should say like the second or third worst people on earth, because actually the Taliban is not even as bad as Al-Qaeda or ISIS, which the Taliban is currently hosting. Right? This is a guy who posed as he was going to unify America around solidarity. And instead, he has been divisive. Instead, he has been awful. And again, his compassion only extends as far as the front of his face. That is it. It extends as far as a mirror. Joe Biden is compassionate to one person and one person only, Joe Biden, which is why when he speaks about grief, he doesn't speak about anybody else's grief. He speaks about his own personal experiences of suffering and grief. He did it again in his speech last night. So, take that for what you will. But if a politician has one pitch, and the pitch ain't competence, and the pitch is not coherence, the pitch is, I'm a nice person, and then that falls apart, you have to ask yourself, what exactly is his pitch for staying president at this point? What is the pitch? And the answer is, there is no pitch. He proved that last night in extremis. It's pretty amazing. So as I've mentioned before, when it comes to politicians, I don't think that you should look to them for empathy. I don't think policy should be rooted in empathy. I think it should be rooted in what is the most practical, what is the most practicable, and what is most in America's interest. But Joe Biden doesn't believe that. Joe Biden believes that policy should be rooted in empathy. So if he is unempathetic, he has nothing else to back his policy, because his policy is obviously not pragmatic. His policy is obviously not effective. It is not useful. And so he is left spinning in circles. And that's what we saw last night. So the president toddles out to the microphone and he proceeds to declare that what he has done is triumphant. He's triumphant about all of this. And we've been giving you the updates. I mean, we gave tens of billions of dollars in American military equipment to the Taliban. We've got thousands of Americans and American green card holders who are stranded behind enemy lines. We have China and Russia on the move. Quick note, yesterday the Taliban were not apparently hanging somebody from a helicopter. It was just somebody taking a joyride beneath the helicopter. We'll wait for a couple of weeks for them to actually hang people beneath the helicopters. In any case, here was Joe Biden yesterday beginning with a triumphal announcement of what Joe Biden, had done.
Last night in Kabul, the United States ended 20 years of war in Afghanistan, the longest war in American history. We completed one of the biggest airlifts in history, with more than 120,000 people evacuated to safety. That number is more than double what most experts thought were possible. No nation has ever done anything like it in all of history.
That's how good this was. It was a historic win for the United States to turn over the country back to the people who committed 9/11 or provided cover for those people. It's a historic win. You know how many people we evacuated from the Titanic here? Man, we are good at evacuating people from the Titanic. What a plan. What a masterfully conceived plan. Well, what about, you might be asking yourself, what about the 13 dead service people because you decided to hand security over to the Taliban? Joe Biden has an answer for you.
They did it facing a crush of enormous crowds seeking to leave the country. And they did it knowing ISIS-K terrorists, sworn enemies of the Taliban, were lurking in the midst of those crowds. 20 service members were wounded in the service of this mission. 13 heroes gave their lives. I was just at Dover Air Force Base for the dignified transfer.
Yeah, checking your watch every 5 seconds and insulting the military parents. By the way, does he ever mention here why it was that they were facing a crush of enormous crowds seeking to leave the country? And why they had to face down ISIS-K terrorists? At no point does he actually mention this. The reason this happened is because he gave up Bagram Air Base, which exists outside of Kabul. The reason that this happened is because he decided to hand over local security directly to the Taliban, the Washington Post has reported, instead of taking the Taliban's own offer of allowing the United States to maintain control of Kabul at least long enough to evacuate our people. At no point is he going to take the blame for that, even though this is, again, a complete Biden policy. See, everything was masterfully handled. And the military's challenges, well, those were natural. Those were just how things were going to be. Okay, then he starts the blame game. So remember, Captain Compassion over here. The blame game is, so normally, if you're compassionate, you normally say, you take the hit, you move on. Not Joe Biden. This is everybody's fault but his. So he starts by ripping into the collapse of the Afghan government and lying about it. He says that he had contingency plans. for the collapse of that guy. And it was sort of foreseen. We know that's a lie. In July, he was explicitly telling people it would not be like the fall of Saigon, that the Taliban did not have the ability to take over the entire country quickly. He himself said that. By the way, he was lying at the time. There's another story from the Daily Mail today, July 23rd, that Biden actually called the now departed Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, and he saw that the Taliban had been making gains. And he asked Ghani to lie about it. He asked Ghani to say to everybody that everything is going fine, apparently. It's not a great phone call, guys. I've noticed that impeachment happens over phone calls these days. So that's not a great phone call. Biden apparently said to Ghani that he wanted Ghani to lie to people. He said, quote, "I need not tell you the perception around the world and in parts of Afghanistan is things are not going well in terms of the fight against the Taliban. There is a need, whether it is true or not, there is a need to project a different picture." Okay, so he knew things were going badly, and he told Ghani to lie about it. Okay, here was Joe Biden explaining, however, that, we had an assumption about the Afghan military holding. It turned out not to be accurate. No one could have predicted this, but we had contingency plans. Number one, a lot of people did predict it. Number two, he knew what was going on. And number three, he did not have a good contingency plan.
That assumption that the Afghan government would be able to hold on for a period of time beyond military drawdown turned out not to be accurate. But I still instructed our national security team to prepare for every eventuality, even that one. And that's what we did.
They did. They prepared for every eventuality. So many eventualities. Now, who are you going to believe? Joe Biden or your own eyes? Clearly, they did not prepare for these eventualities. And clearly, he was putting artificial constraints on his own military. I mean, Mark Milley said as much. He said, we were told that we could have 600 to 700 troops. If, by the way, their contingency plans had been so excellent, why did we have to reinsert thousands of troops on the ground in order to effectuate this evacuation? And if they were such a great contingency, why are there still literally tens of thousands of people we made promises to still stuck there? Okay, so he continues along these lines. We made contingency plans. This was so incoherent. On the one hand, it's the Afghan military's fault. On the other hand, we made contingency plans. On the one hand, it's Trump's fault. On the other hand, I deserve all the credit. Like, he was all over the place because when you don't have an actual defense, you just have to throw at the wall. And that's what Joe Biden is doing right here. Okay, so he continues along these lines.
So we were ready when the Afghan security forces, after 2 decades of fighting for their country and losing thousands of their own, did not hold on as long as anyone expected. We were ready when they and the people of Afghanistan watched their own government collapse and their president flee amid the corruption and malfeasance, handing over the country to their enemy, the Taliban, and significantly increasing the risk to U.S. personnel and our allies.
Okay, so again, everybody's to blame. It was all part of the plan, but the Afghan military completely collapsed, and that's because they're corrupt and terrible. So I just have a question for Joe Biden. At any point here, are you going to mention the fact that you completely withdrew close air support as well as all American military contractors from Afghanistan and destroyed the military from the within and announced that we were going to leave? At any point? No, of course not. Okay, but don't worry. According to Joe Biden, there was not only a plan to deal with the complete collapse of the country, there was an excellent plan for the evacuation, which doesn't explain why we have all these people still stuck on the ground over there and no personnel. But according to Joe Biden, all part of the plan. And you have to be a moron to believe him. You really do. You have to be a clinically stupid person in order to believe this stuff. Here is Joe Biden talking about the wonders of his plan.
As a result, to safely extract American citizens before August 31st, as well as embassy personnel, allies and partners, and those Afghans who had worked with us and fought alongside of us for 20 years, I had authorized 6,000 troops, American troops, to Kabul to help secure the airport. As General McKenzie said, this is the way the mission was designed. It was designed to operate under severe stress and attack, and that's what it did.
Okay, so if you designed the mission, then who's to blame for leaving the Taliban in control of security and getting 13 American service members killed? Well, it's either your plan or it ain't your plan. Which is it? Okay, but then this also leaves a question. If this was such a well-designed and brilliant plan, why are there so many people left behind enemy lines, right? A normal plan, you said you were going to take care of every contingency. A normal plan would have, dealt with the fact that we now have at least hundreds of American citizens behind enemy lines, and an unspecified number of green card holders. By the way, you remember how at the very beginning of this, they were saying there were 10 to 15,000 Americans in Kabul? And remember how that shrunk all the way down to 6,000? You wonder how that happened? It's because they started excising anybody who's a green card holder. If you're an American green card holder, you no longer count. If you're somebody with legal papers, you no longer counted. So they just redefined who got to count as an American for purposes of getting them out, even though green card holders have the same rights from the U.S. Embassy as American citizens proper. That's how they played the statistical game. Anyway, you might be wondering, if it was such a great plan designed by this brilliant piece of human genius, then why are so many people left behind? Joe Biden has an answer. The collapse of the country was the Afghan military's fault, not his. He had a plan. And the evacuation, if it was unsuccessful with regard to these people, that is their fault. That 3-year-old we talked about earlier, that 3-year-old, we told him over and over, you need to come to the airport. And the 3-year-old just kept crying and watching Elmo. Nothing we can do about that. Here was Joe Biden blaming the people who got left behind.
Since March, we reached out 19 times to Americans
what is he so pissed about, by the way?
in Afghanistan with multiple warnings and offers to help them leave Afghanistan, all the way back as far as March. After we started the evacuation 17 days ago, we did initial outreach and analysis and identified around 5,000 Americans who had decided earlier to stay in Afghanistan, but now wanted to leave. Our Operation Allied Rescue ended up getting more than 5,500 Americans out.
Okay, so here he says, well, in March we were telling people to leave. Yeah, and in July you were saying the country definitely was not going to fall. So which is it, dude? Okay, so then he gets to the people who are still left. And he says, you know what? Their fault. They wanted to stay probably. All these people trying to get out, probably their fault. Everybody's fault except for this doddering fool.
Now we believe that about 100 to 200 Americans remain in Afghanistan with some intention to leave. Most of those who remain are dual citizens, longtime residents who had earlier decided to stay because of their family roots in Afghanistan. The bottom line, 90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave. And for those remaining Americans, there is no deadline. We remain committed to get them out if they want to come out.
If they want to come out, but they don't want to come out, right? It's their fault. They're stuck there, obviously. I mean, that's clearly what's happening right there. By the way, I do love when he uses stats like 90% of Americans, we got them out. Now they're saying it's 98% of Americans, right? Because they're trying to downgrade the number of Americans who are actually stuck there, even though they still don't have exact numbers. 90% of Americans. Well, you know what's unbelievable? Here's an unbelievable stat for you. You ready? On 9/11, 99.999, I believe, 99.999% of Americans were not killed by terrorists on 9/11. Isn't that amazing? Wow, what an amazing success story that was. Incredible. Like truly inspiring. The President of the United States here. Okay, in a second, we'll get to him continuing to make excuses, him continuing with his false binaries and his straw men. This is a pathetic spectacle for the United States. He's completely destroyed American interests in the Near East and in Central Asia. And he has done so while destroying his own reputation, by the way, whatever was left of that. Who's got two thumbs and wants you to like and subscribe?